Thinking Basketball Podcast. My name is Ben. Welcome back to another episode. Happy April Fool's Day. Look at that. It's April 1st. I really have no idea what April Fool's is or where it comes from. Maybe you do, Cody, but yeah, it is technically the 1st of April. We're in the final month of the regular season, and next week we are going to, I believe, do our Thinkies. This is very exciting. Our somehow like the 7th annual Thinkies, I believe. The week after that, we're going to preview the NBA playoffs because that's it. There's no more regular season. But today, first, we want to talk about a little video that we did about downhill offense, the Giannis offense, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Also, this is a good time with the Damian Lillard news. Well, yet another blood clot situation, and these are particularly scary, of course, because if they come back, they can be career threatening and things like that. So it's almost like the Bucks season is sort of coming to an end, and this is yet another weird year for Giannis. And I know, Cody, you have thoughts about that as our residence Bucks homer, or according to the internet, the man who hates the Bucks the most. How are you doing? Because after we talk about Giannis today, you have your top 32 shooters in the NBA this season that we're going to discuss. There's some connectivity between these topics, so we'll get to that later. But first, the Giannis Antetokounmpo Bucks, and yet another year where this great player I'm feeling a little Kevin Garnett-y vibes. Cody, we're lost in basketball Siberia here.
I mean, at least like the Bucks won a championship. Like, this isn't quite Kevin Garnett territory. Like, the closest he ever got was the Western Conference Finals. And what was that? Was that 2004? I think it was the most competitive when Sam Cassell, he had an injury. He came back, I think, against the Lakers. It was a little bit of he wasn't full strength. I'm not even sure if they would have beat the Lakers if he was full strength, but Kevin Garnett really put on quite a display there. But that was true basketball Siberia. So I've been really lucky, Ben, being a Wisconsin and now Minnesota resident. Like, I've seen a lot of good stuff in terms of really good players being stuck on teams. The Damian Lillard news is just awful. Like, full stop. Like you said, it's just terrible news. We hate seeing this kind of thing from really any player. Obviously, we want to see the best players play, but we want to see all players be as healthy as possible to actualize their careers as much as possible. But I mean, if we're talking like hypothetically before the news, if I'm being honest with you, like, did I really think the Bucks were going to make it out of the first round prior to Damian Lillard being injured? I'm not so sure. Like, I wasn't really sold on it. Now, I don't know, it just kind of solidifies the mediocrity that's going on with the team, just because I don't trust a lot of the stuff that's going on around Giannis at this point. We can get into some of that in a second, but I think Giannis himself is an interesting focal point to talk about here because he keeps being pretty awesome, Ben. Like, really, really awesome. I think if he's able to play enough games, if he hits the 65 game threshold, this should be the 7th season in a row that he finishes top 5 in MVP voting. 7th season in a row, top 5 MVP voting. Now, I looked back historically. I don't have those up. I did this a while ago. That's a really big number. Like, nobody does it. I think the only current player that has done it is LeBron James, right? And I think he has the record with like 12 or something like that. But Jokic isn't quite there yet. I don't think Durant ever did it because of injury. Harden never did it. Kawhi never did it. None of these guys were able to do it. And Giannis, if he plays enough, is on the precipice of doing it and hitting that vaulted territory. So I don't know. It is really sad to see this literal all-time level guy. And the Bucks have not, even including the 2021 championship run, we haven't seen a healthy Bucks run since the 2020 season in the playoffs. And it's really sad when you just think about the historical lens of competitive NBA basketball.
Yeah, do you think you're going to get yelled at for saying that you didn't think the Bucks were going to get out of the first round? Something's gone on where every time we don't include the Bucks in our top tier, there's all sorts of fans. What's going on with the Bucks fans? They've been coming after us for about a year and a half since we pronounced them as, just for perspective, because we've talked about this offline. I know where you're coming from. Milwaukee 4-17 record against the top 10 teams this year. They have played better, but they were something like 19-12 with their 4 best players in the lineup with a +3 point differential since December 1st, which is solid, but it's not going to cut it this season against the teams ahead of them. Just as a point of comparison, because we talked about it a couple months ago, the Pacers are 26-10 with their best 4 players in that time span with a +6.5 point differential. So, a good team, but in a year, the way the league shook out this year, even with Lillard, maybe they get the right first round matchup. The matchup with the Pacers actually would have been somewhat interesting I think. But of course, this is a team that is very thin. And so we did the video on Giannis, and it was very fun to go back and be able to kind of look at the history of not only this style of offense where LeBron James is in very, very many ways an inspiration and a prototype, but at the same time, you had Ben Simmons in Philadelphia. And so I think some of the 76ers fans were like, we were doing this in 2018. And it's like, yes, correct. That 2018 was the stretch that I think Simmons really came to life at the end of the year when Embiid missed some time and then they went into the playoffs. We've talked about that recently as well. And 2018, going back and watching that Bucks offense the last year before Coach Bud arrived, my note file on it was just LOL. It was just wild to watch what was going on with this team. And Giannis was a screener, and he's kind of like, he's a point forward. And then I started thinking about the history of point forwards and Paul Pressey and Scottie Pippen and the kind of defined roles that these guys played. And now that we have a longer lens to look back on that, you realize, okay, wow, the reason why this video and this offense, I'm not calling it the LeBron offense, and it's not about LeBron, is because he was too early for this. They didn't have the spacing. They didn't have the infrastructure. In fact, going back and looking at footage, it was harder to find clips of this in Miami, even though they kind of, moved Chris Bosh to a stretch 5 position at a certain point. LeBron James, of course, I've said many times, I think probably the greatest transition player in NBA history, but this is semi-transition, early offense, half-court offense, spacing the floor, and that really didn't come about until the middle of the 2010s and the spacing revolution. And then, of course, when you get Milwaukee and you get Giannis and they bring in Brook Lopez and they put the 4-point line on the court. Unfortunately, I had to cut that for time. We had some great, old little interviews about putting the 4-point line in the practice facility there, which the Bucks were very famous for at the time. And you have a stretch 5 and you can create all this space. All of a sudden, it's like, your mind's blown. You're like, okay, how do I stay in front of this kind of player? And historically, there just weren't very many of them. And then there were a few more over the ensuing season. Zion came along, and now I'm just starting to see it everywhere. And that was the inspiration for the video. And that, of course, is like a nice couching for everything Giannis Antetokounmpo, who, as you said, 7 straight top 3 MVPs, really a pioneering kind of player, very, very unique, interesting, strange kind of player who's become almost this archetype unto of himself.
I think what's interesting, if you go back to LeBron, I'm looking at the roster for the 2009 Cavaliers, which is part of the, now
stacked
legendary LeBron James playoff run going against the
Boobie. And what do you got? Delonte West, Mo Williams. You got a Boobie Gibson in there, Varejao, Hickson. This team is stacked.
So the starters for this team, the players that started every single game in their 14-game playoff run there was Delonte West, Mo Williams, LeBron James, Anderson Varejao, and Zydrunas Ilgauskas. And Ilgauskas being like 7'2" or 7'3", whatever he was, he was considered a bit of a stretchy guy because he would stand 15 feet away and splash that little no-jump jumper that Marc Gasol then started to master a few years later. But they slotted in Delonte West basically to be the shooting guard because they're just like, we need to get any kind of shooting around LeBron. To them, this was spacing, having Ilgauskas and having Delonte West come at the shooting guard. But the other thing that I think LeBron unlocks a lot more than some of these other guys, that I think Giannis also is truly part of the lineage of, is those Cavaliers teams and those LeBron lineups were just so good defensively, right? You could have this kind of offense while still having a lockdown defense. It wasn't like there were a ton of holes there. Obviously, Mo Williams wasn't necessarily the strongest defensive player, but when you have somebody like LeBron playing the forward position, when you have Giannis playing a forward or a big position, the center position, honestly, sometimes it does a lot to help your defense. And I think that's the thing that both of these guys are most what should I say, closely related to when it comes to this kind of offense.
I think that was your point when we talked about top offensive players a couple weeks ago about centers and Nikola Jokic, right? Mm-hmm. The ability to have that much value coming from the center position inherently. Now it's a double-edged sword with Jokic because you want the 5 to be your best defensive player, maybe in theory, but just offensively, what it does is it allows you to put, in this case, shooters or specialists or just more offensive talent around a big player like that. So I just it's an interesting career in that he had so much promise as the Greek freak with these incredible dimensions and the way he moved. But even though he still had good numbers in 2018, Cody, can you pull that up? Where was his like MVP, All-Starry? Like what were the accolades in 2018? Because he was already considered a very good player, and there were articles already being written about whether he could win MVP. But it was really the unlocking of this particular kind of downhill pressure. And of course, the key to this is, as we'll get to when we talk about shooters, we're doing all this research for shooters, and I look up different. I look up what happens off the dribble and when someone's open, and we're looking at volume. We'll get to that in a little bit, but I sort it all out, and at the bottom of all these lists is Giannis Antetokounmpo. I'm like, why is there a player shooting this many threes on my filter, shooting 26% on his open threes? And you can argue like he's the worst guy in the league. Now, is he a worse shooter than Clint Capella? Of course not. Clint Capella doesn't take threes, but among the players that take a lot of threes, Giannis basically always blips the radar as the worst outside shooter in the league. And yet it's this incredible ball handling, the ability to have some passing and playmaking chops, and then tune that into, like, the way I put it in the video is the other side of modern spacing, where the spacers around him are creating this thing that wouldn't be there. It wasn't there the year before. The year before, to me, is closer how Giannis would feel in like a 2000s era or a 90s era. He would be like a Swiss Army knife player who did all kinds of different weird things, but it wouldn't be this offense unto itself. And that, to me, is such an interesting component of getting the long lens of this story versus just like in 2019 when he finally ascended to MVP.
I think what's interesting is in 2017, Giannis finished 7th in MVP voting, and he was second team All NBA. In 2018, 6th in MVP voting. Again, second team All NBA. But here's the fascinating thing, Ben. In neither of those seasons did he get an All Defensive accolade. Didn't get an All Defensive accolade. You go to 2019, he finishes second in Defensive Player of the Year. And then 2020 is the mythical year then when he wins MVP, wins Defensive Player of the Year, and then it would be the next year that he wins Finals MVP, of course, when they win the championship. But I think what's interesting then, you talk about spacing and shooting and stuff, the variable in terms of how the Bucks ran their offense was Chris Middleton. Because Chris Middleton, of course, was incredible in 2021. He had some injury concerns then after that for the next few years. And I think the question might be, where did Middleton himself peak as a player? Because I think if you look at some of the numbers, you could make an argument that his peak was closer to that 2018, 2019 realm, especially as a shooter. He was always an incredible mid-range shooter. So that was one of those things where like the offensive talent was there, but there wasn't quite the system to unlock what Giannis could really do. And you bring up the ball handling thing. I think the key part of Giannis as a ball handler is that his unbelievable strides are such that if he gets a step around you, like just one step, it's over. It's completely over because he can step from 18 feet away. And even if he's not dunking it, he can do a Dr. J finger roll where he's just at the rim. And it's like, how did this guy get here? There was I think it was a Knicks game maybe in like 2017 or 2018 where he dunks from basically the free throw line in the game. Like I think he takes off from the elbow, like legitimately like a 16-foot dunk. It's one of the longest dunks I've ever seen. So that's the superpower he has, is he doesn't even need like Steph Curry level handles. He just needs to get one step around you, and then he could just take off from anywhere.
Well, I think this is another reason why this offense, besides the spacing, didn't exist, because you didn't have the gather step as a prominent tool in past generations. And of course, a lot of the old heads really, get upset about that, where they're like, wait a second, what's going on? The dude's taking 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps by the old definition of traveling. But if, to your point, when you have this kind of space, when you have this kind of downhill pressure, you see it with someone like Avdia, you see it with some of these quicker guys. You want to be able to find that little spot around the corner and burst into it. And when you can use the pickup and then the 2 full steps and then blend that with the Euro step, in Giannis's case, we used the GYRO, the Euro step, then it becomes this thing that we've never seen before. So to me, it makes some sense as a fan following along in real time to both say, wow, this guy's the Greek freak. Like, look at the numbers and the rebounding and the passing and the way he moves and the skills, but also not necessarily immediately see how it would look a decade later as someone on the precipice of his 7th straight top 3 MVP. And to go back to the 2018-2019 difference, yes, he finished 6th in MVP. Yes, he averaged 26 a game or whatever the juicy numbers were. But to me, that's a classic example of the impact and the stats not necessarily aligning, because the most salient factor to me is that the Bucks offense in 2018 with him on the floor had a 111 offensive rating, and the Bucks offense in 2019 had a 117 offensive rating. So you have a massive jump in offensive performance from the entire team once you kind of realize this system and this what to me is just the Giannis offense, which is now becoming more and more prevalent around the league.
One thing I want to say about like the gather step and the fact that some of these old heads get really indignant about this kind of thing. I would just like to bring up that the famous transition cradle dunk from Jordan, I think it's against the Knicks. He definitely uses the gather step. Like there's definitely like 4 steps going in as he goes up and cradles it. Now I'm not going to wipe that dunk away. That dunk is sick. I wish more people would cradle it home once in a while like that. But that's a clear example. Like you watch that highlight, you can't look me in the straight face and tell me that that's a not travel by the 90s rules or 80s rules. I actually don't know what year it was. It could have been the late 80s.
I think it was rookie. I think it was his rookie years, like 85 or something. I think it was 85. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think so too, because that dunk is so spectacular. Because like, oh, what is this nonsense that we're dealing with right now? I think the key also to the offense, not only Mike Budenholzer. Sorry, I'm going back to the Bucks now. The key to the offense going from 18 to 19 is when we talk about spacing, right? Like when you have somebody like Giannis playing the 4, right? This is the kind of thing that we see with when you think about Zion, for instance, right now. Everyone's fan casting and being like, if only you could have like Kristaps Porzingis, if only you could have Al Horford or whatever center he could shoot. Do you know what center makes his way because another team just didn't want to sign like $5 million for this guy, Ben? You know who makes his way over?
Are you talking about Brook?
I am talking about Brook Lopez.
Yeah.
2018. Plays for the Lakers. 2019. Budenholzer's like, hey, it's just like the Hawks team I had, right? Everyone spread out, except this time instead of like Jeff Teague taking people off the dribble, we're going to send Giannis taking people off the dribble. And that was the true thing that unlocked them, is being able to have that defensive dynamo, and Brook Lopez is a drop guy, while also being able to space the floor a little bit more than Giannis. The other rules thing, Ben, that I know you've talked about quite a bit, that I think Giannis takes pretty good advantage of, is the fact that I think, how do I want to phrase it, Ben? How do I want to phrase it? He's reffed in a way where he is often allowed to just truck into people with a lot of force in a way that if it happened in any other era of basketball, it would be called an offensive foul like 3 or 4 times a game. And I think when you have a combination of the gather step, you have a combination of like that allowed physicality, Giannis has a little bit of leeway running this kind of offense.
He does. And I think it agitates people, and but that's a conversation for another day. I've said many times I would love to see the league do a better job, basically, of allowing defenders to be in a space where if they get a shoulder in the middle of their body, or if they get a forearm, that would actually be an offensive foul, because I think it's the spirit of the rules historically in basketball. B, it's probably closer to the way the rules are laid out right now. And C, and maybe most importantly, I think most fans, like, they want that. They intuit that. They don't want players getting run over. And I was actually going to ask you, because it's related to the trucking, as you call it. Giannis is he's a perimeter version of Shaq, as I've said many times before. Just an incredible ability to get downhill and get to the basket and use that physicality. But when you go back and you look at like 2018, 2019, he was a lot more slender. How do you feel about the upper body weight room progress that he's quite yoked to still be able to play like this?
First of all, someone in the comments made a comment that said same can be said with a lot of players. I think in reference with the physicality and driving, that's absolutely true. A lot of people use liberal use of the arm bar, pushing people off.
100%. Yep.
I think we've talked about Shea using it, to get some space for that mid-range. But listen, there's a little bit of a difference between Shea like shoving somebody off and Giannis being like, I'm going straight into your chest. Like you said, Giannis is a weight room guy. Not that these other guys aren't, but he's a weight room guy that has now actualized into a bodybuilder. Like some of those offseason Instagram pictures he took were like, I mean, Ben Simmons is also king of like the offseason Instagram pics, but Giannis is someone that came back and it's like, oh, Okay, so that wasn't just mirror tricks. Like, you're out here showing off what you've done with those deltoids. Like, those deltoids are going straight into somebody's sternum before dunking down. So yeah, he's a key bodybuild guy in the league.
But do you feel like this has helped him in terms of being able to get away with more and just plow through people? Do you feel like it's hurt him because you have a little bit more muscle mass and maybe it challenges his cardio? I mean, there's a lot of debate about whether that's even like how much of a thing that is, if you can put on muscle mass and then offset it with cardio performance, of course, although you're moving more weight in theory, maybe that's more effort. Like, do you have feelings about that? It feels to me like he's remained fairly steadily the same sort of physical specimen and kind of, I mean, the shooting, maybe if, I don't know, maybe if he didn't do so many arms, maybe it would be slightly easier to shoot the grapefruit up. That thing can't even feel like a grapefruit to him. It's got to feel like a ping pong ball.
So let me throw in some numbers here. I'm not making any claims, right? I'm just pulling up some numbers, right? And we can make some decisions after this. Between 2015 and 2019, so it's like 388 games, right? Giannis shoots 75% from the free throw line. 75%.
Wow. See, I would not have expected it to be that high.
Yeah, in 360 games. Ben, since then, so the 2020 season to current season 2025, 66%.
Yeah, that's what it feels like all the time.
388 games. So it's almost exactly split. So he's dropped almost 10 percentage points since that first time here. I don't know. I don't know what other explanation would cause such a consistent drop in shooting mechanics. Because
you're saying it's the muscle. Yep.
I'm saying there's a chance that the muscle is impacting the free throw shooting.
Yeah. Yeah, not on that, and the 26% 3-point shooting as well. Yeah. Although when I said he polished stuff, I mean, it's always cool to see players go through this meat of their prime and stay at this level. And in Giannis's case, the passing and some of the reads got a little crisper, I thought, as he saw more of the wall and more of these coverages against this kind of downhill spacing that he was using. And now this year, finally in 2025, I've been begging to the basketball gods. We got the mid-ranger, and that at least we got that little like inside 15 feet mid-range counter. He shot that very well this year, and so he continues to play well, and we'll see where we have him at the end of the year when we do our top 10 players. But I mean, spoiler alert, it's going to be near the top again.
I mean, we talked about this before, so I don't want to like belabor this particular point, but a key part of that is just like the playoff offense situation, where we see some really top tier offenses during the regular season with Giannis. In the playoffs, those numbers when he's on the court drop quite a bit. But again, we see a similar sort of thing with the defenses, where they're just better in the playoffs versus the regular season. Again, Chris Middleton is the guy that really led some high level offenses when they got into the playoffs. So I think it's one of those things where he was paired with a very good offensive player that was really able to keep up that number when they went to the playoffs. And unfortunately, when we get to the top 10 players, like, we're just not going to have a deep playoff run from Giannis to really see how things have changed. Like, is the jumper going to be consistent in the playoffs, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know. That's a really sad part about not seeing him go deeper.
Well, I think also, and this goes back to making the video and going through all these old seasons, you go back and you look at like 2019, 2020, if you don't have the right shooters out there, if you have Eric Bledsoe out there and the team can just ignore him, this kind of downhill offense that we discuss in the video, it's not as diverse by definition. I mean, I'm definitionally saying, like, we're talking about the middle of the floor. We're talking about the spacing effect that occurs with shooters. And so what that means, I think, is, well, now I can actually take away your primary fastball coming at me, and you really don't have much of a second pitch. And this is where, like, having a mid-range game or just some other type of counter. And that's why when I did the video, I wanted to show that this isn't just about, someone in the comments mentioned like giant Russell Westbrook. To a degree, yes. Like Russell Westbrook, it's very hard for short players to do this, but that's the kind of athlete Russell Westbrook was. But also Westbrook at his peak had a decent mid-range shot. There was some other element of a counter there. And I think when you get into the playoffs and some of those playoff numbers, you really want, like, you might know off the top of your head, I don't remember what happens when Drew Holiday's there, or if we looked at different lineups with certain shooters, but you really don't want what they had in 2019 and 2020. And you really want more of the idea of like, hey, if you punish against the Suns in the 21 finals, it was just such a clear feeling of we need to send multiple defenders at you when you have space, and Giannis being like, well, I know exactly where to put it. Chris is in this corner, Drew's in this corner, Brooke Lopez is on the wing, somebody's in the dunker spot. You guys are going to be in trouble. And you really want that extra pitch to be able to use as a counter against defending that kind of space.
Well, something that a lot of people have I've gotten into arguments in the past about 2021 Drew, because I think if you look at his shooting numbers, they're pretty rough.
Yeah, they struggled. Yeah.
They're really not great. But the thing that Drew did differently from Eric Bledsoe is that he was much better as a passer. He was much better getting into the teeth of the defense as a creator, and he could finish in other sorts of ways. And I think just his size, Eric Bledsoe is a pretty short guard comparatively to somebody like Drew Holiday. He was just able to handle a lot more pressure. And I think the key part is Middleton or Giannis is off the court, and Drew could just take on a heavier load. Like, he basically became a 20-10 guy, 20 points, 10 assists or so when Giannis was off the court, if I'm not mistaken, during that 2021 run. By the way, also, we've said Eric Bledsoe's name a couple times. I love Eric Bledsoe. Love him to death. He has some weaknesses as a shooter. There definitely needed to be an upgrade there for that championship run to happen, but I have no ill will towards him. I always thought that he was maybe the best pick dodger in the league at his defensive peak. He maybe had a run for the best point of attack guard in the league for a period of time. Loved me some Eric Bledsoe, and I actually miss having him in the league. He was a good dude.
Do you have any other Giannis thoughts before we get to your top 32 shooters of the 2025 season?
I actually want to ask you, because obviously this is the Giannis offense, right? Like, we don't need to talk about Giannis being effective in this kind of an offense. But who do you think right now are like the top candidates for running the Giannis offense in the league right now?
Zion Williamson. That's the end of the list. I mean, other players, because all the other players we talk about can do it to some degree. Jaren Jackson has done it to some degree in Memphis, and it's actually interesting with the coaching change there to see if he loses some of those reps, what happens if you go back to more John Morant pick and roll, because Jaren has just been devastating with that space. He can hit pull-up threes at a decent percentage, but the short mid-range, the touch, the spins, he's a huge guy. So other players can do this. Deni Avdija is a really exciting one. And Deni Avdija has more of that completeness that I mentioned, where you're not going to have a guy run this 20% of the time in a team's possessions. It might be 8 to 10% or something like that. Avdija can pass a little, he can shoot, he's still coming into his own, but he's like 6'9", 240 in the book in shoes, moves like a blur. Started the season like 14 points a game, up and down, that we talked about. He's been over 20 points a game for the last little bit. Playing really, really well. So there are guys like that I think have some promise at a moderate to large volume. But Zion could be better than Giannis at this, in my opinion. Like, that's where I am with Zion. Zion, if he's healthy and in shape, absolutely could be phenomenal. Is that a hot take? Am I going to get clipped by someone and be like, Thinking Basketball says, no, I absolutely think Zion could be spectacular in this role. They don't have the right infrastructure. They're not running this offense that much. And in fact, in researching the video, it came to my attention that Zion Williamson has run exactly one inverted pick and roll the entire season in 2025 with a team with CJ McCollum, Jordan Hawkins, like other small guards that could do this. So they're just not doing it. And I think if Zion's put in a position either in New Orleans or somewhere else, I think he could be potentially even better in this situation than Giannis.
Not that I necessarily disagree, but just for a little podcast excitement here, just to add a little bit of spice to this conversation, because we talk about maybe some of the weaknesses Giannis has is he hasn't necessarily had some of these counters. He didn't develop the jump shot, et cetera, et cetera. This year, Zion.
Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this?
I'm trying to do some really quick calculations.
This is literally the third podcast this year that you've done this. Do you remember that you've done this in the other two podcasts? You're going to use a stat about how many total shots he's taken outside a certain distance. Am I right?
Except I'm going to say it with percentages.
Am I right? Oh my God.
I'm going to say it with percentages. So if my math is mathing, 3% of his shots have been from 16 feet or out. 3%. 3 out of every 100 shots is 16 feet or further. So what sorts of things are you seeing from Zion that you think would make him be more effective in this kind of an offense than Giannis.
Do you really feel this way? Do you really feel that?
Just
Do you have actual genuine concerns about this because he also doesn't have an outside shot?
Well, I just want to know. I want to know what you're thinking. I'm just here to defend Milwaukee as much as possible, Ben.
Why? What does this have to do with Milwaukee? This is a totally. You asked me who else could do this.
Listen, I just need Bucks Reddit or something to be like, Cody is the champion we've been waiting for, and here he is.
Okay. Zion's touch around the basket is absurd. His finishing and launch points are basically indefensible. His ability to generate shots at the rim might be like outside of like big men in the old days, like Shaq, who parked themselves there. He might be the best in NBA history. Like 18 shots every 100 possessions or whatever the number is at the rim. You always like to cite the Giannis number as an outlier, and it is. But Zion's actually the one when you hit the qualifier who's there or past him. It's kind of ridiculous. The ball handling. I also think Zion has room to grow. I think he has not had a really nice growth development curve in the last few years through injuries, through the weight issues, through coaching changes, through a ton of personnel changes in New Orleans. So I just feel like with the instincts he has as a passer, the ball handling, the finishing, the launch points, the physicality, I feel like it's all there. If you put this infrastructure, we're in 2018, 2017 Bucks land here. We got to get to 2019 or 2020. I knocked over my water. I got so excited.
Here's the thing. In terms of their offense, I feel like Zion's best kind of offense is this sort of offense, right? You surround Zion with some shooters, you get a good ecosystem, you let him, take people off the dribble, finish that way. That is the best version of Zion. I think it would be pretty spectacular. The Giannis offense, here's the irony of it, Ben, and I've said this many times before. I don't think it's the best version of a Giannis offense. I just don't. Like him with the ball at the top and four guys spacing around the court. Like, I just don't think that's the best version.
You're going the wrong way. The Bucks Reddit is going to be mad at you for this. You're supposed to say that he's the best at this.
It's like muscle confusion, right? It doesn't mean anything, but it's going to confuse them all, right? But no, the best Giannis is him being able to duck in, use his size, get some position, throw down, get out in transition, and things like that. Like Paolo Banchero, for instance. Like he came up in the video for a second as somebody that, might be trying to leverage some of these skills to be as effective at the Giannis type of offense. But something I see with the Magic that I actually like a lot more from Banchero is when he flashes to the nail, right? He catches there and then tries to make a decision. Now, I'd like to see quicker decisions once he catches the ball there, and I think that would unlock a lot more of what Banchero is able to do. But I think Giannis is more in that. I would prefer to see Giannis catching in different areas inside the arc as opposed to being the guy that's initiating all that. I think that's the best version of Giannis that we can see.
Cody, would you like to give us the top 32 shooters in the NBA according to you this year? You've teased me with this. You've said we have to talk about the best shooters. A couple years ago, we did a podcast about the best shooters in the history of the NBA. This is a little different. This is a little more focused on today's game. You have some thoughts about that. How would you like to present what you would like to say about this? This is very it's a very hard topic to discuss.
Let me ask you something first. Every time you've seeded this conversation, you've said 32. Why is 32 the number?
You said 32 to me right before we recorded.
Did I?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was wondering where you were getting this very specific number from.
You said I have a large tier.
Okay.
And I think you said some other number, and then you said, "Oh no, it's 32." And I said, "Yeah, that makes okay. Yeah, I can see that."
Okay, so this is a question I've been pondering right now. I'm like, all right, yes, who's actually like the best shooters in the NBA? I think we can look at the numbers. Yeah, say what you're going to say.
Can I propose someone?
Sure. Say it.
Stephen Wardell Curry. What about him?
Yeah.
Actually, Wardell's his first name, right? What's going on? Go ahead.
This is one of those guys that like you can just eye test it. You can look at the numbers. It's pretty open and shut. Like Steph Curry is just the best shooter in the NBA. But then I'm like, is there like how do you judge the actual best shooters. Because I went back and I was listening to our pod from, I think it was like December of 22, right? It was a couple of years ago. We were trying to have the conversation in the context of history, right? So we were trying to wrap in like long mid-range stuff, trying to estimate volume and efficiency and whatnot for some of these older players that weren't, native shooters essentially from what we see now. But now we have so much granular data. Like when you try and pull up shooting numbers now, you have catch and shoot, wide open threes, you have pull up threes, things like that, right? So when you try and take all that in, I'm trying to look at the numbers, I'm trying to watch guys, and I'm like, what actually is the best shooting skill set, right? Like, do you want somebody that's going to just not miss wide open threes? The guy that's going to, lift or something when a pick and roll happens, he's going to catch and bury it. Or do you want someone whose wide open numbers are maybe a little bit lower, but takes a ton of pull-up threes and makes them at a pretty respectable volume? And I think that's kind of the push-pull that I found myself in when I was investigating this question.
Okay, here's my question. Why don't you want both?
Well, I don't know if that really exists.
Why
right?
not?
Like,
Steph Curry does that.
Exactly. That's why he's number one. Right? Like if there
were
more
guys, exists, right?
If there were more guys that did it, Steph Curry wouldn't be number one. But the point is, you kind of have it's like a video game where you're trying to like add points to a certain skill set. Like nobody's maxed out in both of those besides him. There are people that are good. There are people that are very good. But I think it gets a little bit messy when you talk about some guys.
Well, somebody's got to be number one, right?
Yes, that is true.
Right. So then the players below that, they can still do it as well. They just might not do it to the same degree of perfection. I mean, Curry doesn't do it to perfection, but if he's at 43% and they're at 41%, that's like almost as good. But I hope you would agree that there's other players who are very good shooters and catch and shoot and very good shooters off the dribble, right?
Let me ask you something.
Yes, please.
When I said like the top 10 shooters in the NBA,
mm-hmm.
Did Anthony Edwards come to mind?
No.
Why not? Last I checked, he was second in the NBA in threes. He takes an enormous volume. He has a pretty large pull-up volume. And I was like, I wonder why Anthony Edwards didn't come up for me in my mind either. So I thought I'd pitch it over to you.
Well, first of all, this is very new. So, I mean, if you wanted me to take what he's doing at face value, then yeah, he might have come up. What's his free throw percentage this year? Because in the last 2 years, it's at under 84%. And you're just not going to make my top tier of shooters, basically, unless you're absolutely extraordinary in some other area, while also being like, okay, I'm like an 80% free throw shooter.
Oh, wow. I was going to say he's shooting 90%, but he's not. He's shooting 84% right now.
Okay, so the same as last year.
Yeah.
Basically. So, I mean, to your question, if Anthony Edwards put these kind of numbers up over a larger period of time, and I really thought of him as a shooter who could just, go into a game and drill pull up threes off the dribble like this in people's faces, and some of his other numbers were good. I don't have them up in front of me, but I mean, that's the answer, right? It's just because other players shoot better in other conditions, don't they?
Okay. Here's what I'm thinking with him. And I think he's an interesting test case to start with this. So when you look at like wide open numbers, you look at pull-up numbers, you look at a bunch of these guys, you try and start to see patterns. If somebody starts approaching like 50% on wide open threes across like a 3-year sample, like that's the top of the top. Those are going to be some of the best shooters. And then you start bringing it down a bit. You see guys shooting 48%, 47%, 49% from wide open shots. Those are all going to be excellent, the best wide open guys. For pull-up shooting, it looks like 40% on volume pull-up shooting is like the high mark, right? Like people aren't really going to be shooting much more than 40% on like a 3-year sample of pull-up threes. Maybe Steph Curry at his peak did something like that, but I'm not seeing much evidence of that kind of thing happening a lot.
You'll be in the low 40s, basically.
Very low. Like we're not even talking like 44, 43%, right?
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, yeah, maybe. So low 40s. I mean, Curry a couple years ago was probably like 44% or 43% or whatever it is, but you are not in the mid or high 40s essentially.
No, definitely not. Anthony Edwards is shooting 36% on like the 10th most pull-up volume in the league, right? 36% on that kind of volume is really, really good, right?
Sure.
But if you look at his wide open 3-point percentage over the last couple of years, shooting 39% on wide open threes.
Mm-hmm.
that's not great. Like, that's not the kind of shooter that if you space him up across the court, that defenses are really going to bend and try and shut down, right? So Anthony Edwards is this fascinating push-pull where it's like he's going to take a lot of pull-up threes. He's going to make quite a few of them. Overall, he's going to be like a 40% shooter. But if you leave him wide open, like, he's really not in the upper echelon of shooters in that kind of condition. So in that kind of context, in my mind, I'm like, I don't know if I can have Anthony Edwards in the upper echelon of shooters, because I think there's something, like, if I were to weight it, I feel like I'd be weighting shooting wide open shots more than I would weight one's ability to shoot pull-up threes.
I just don't think. I just think there are other players that shoot better than him, right?
But then what is your definition of better in this case? Just the wide open shots? Because that's kind of what I'm saying.
No, better numbers, better percentages in different conditions, and I mean, there are players that take pull-up threes that make it at a higher percentage than 36%.
But the volume that he has is the one that stands out to me. And somebody else, I think that's even interesting, and it seems like his 3-point percentage has dropped a little bit. Duncan Robinson, who actually takes more pull-up threes than he does wide open threes, which might be interesting based on the kind of archetype you'd expect from him. But Duncan Robinson over the last 3 seasons shooting 41% on three pull-up 3-point attempts per 36, and he's shooting 41% on 3 years of wide open 3-point percentage. That's an interesting test case as well, because you're like, wow, here's a guy that's shooting just an extraordinary number on pull-up threes, but then when you stack up his wide open numbers versus somebody else who might come up, it's a little bit lower. So, like, that's the dynamic that I keep looking at when I'm trying to determine who's the best shooter in the league.
But certainly, you don't think Anthony Edwards is a candidate for the. Did he make your top 32 tier?
No, he didn't. He was just somebody that I investigated because he has such a high volume of threes that he takes, and he makes his pull-up threes at a high volume. Like, he shoots quite a few of them, and he makes them somewhat efficiently compared to some other guys.
Okay. All right. What else you got?
Well, so ultimately, what I'm trying to get at with that whole thing is I do think when I'm looking at shooters, I want to see guys that are going to shoot a lot better on wide open threes. That might sound like it's a really simplistic thing, but I'm weighting the wide open shooting more than I'm weighting one's ability to hit the pull-up shots. And I think the Giannis offense is an interesting entry point to that, because if you're a much better wide open shooter, like, you're going to open up the lanes for these drivers. You're going to open up the lanes for these rollers. You're going to cause other defenders to just freak out when they come over a screen and stuff. But if you have a pull-up guy, it doesn't have the same sort of off-ball gravity that some of these other guys have.
Well, I would be careful about just looking at the wide open 3 numbers, though. I mean, first of all, I think for what you're talking about, you want to look at catch and shoot. You want to look at open and wide open, or depending on, I have a little birdie who can pull some numbers for me. I have contested, uncontested, and lightly contested 3-pointers as well in front of me that I pulled for this to just try to understand your tier of top, to poke holes in your tier of top 32. But I think, to your point, like, if you only look at the wide open numbers for, let's stick with Damian Lillard, someone who has the ball a lot and shoots a lot of pull-up threes, it's almost mathematically difficult for him to get a lot of wide open shots. And so you have a very small sample. You're not going to have a very small number of volume of those shots. Curry might be the only guy that can kind of do a little bit of both and get the volume up, because frankly, Curry's such a great shooter that his volume of threes is absurd. And the only reason why he has numbers in the percentage column that look more pedestrian is because he takes so many contested and insane shots in this situation. And when you start to like filter those out, you go like, oh, okay, yeah, nobody takes, let's see here, Stephen Curry. Nobody takes outside of like Emmanuel Quickly, Buddy Hield, Dante DiVincenzo. We can throw in LaMelo Ball. For the most part, nobody takes more uncontested or lightly contested threes. And look at that. He makes them at 43%, which is, outside of a Mike Conley or Isaiah Joe hot streak, right up there with the best of them. And you do that with Curry, and you go through like any filter of shooting, and you kind of have that lens of him as being like near the top of the league in volume or efficiency. And like I said, I think there are other players like Tyrese Halliburton kind of has that toggle, right? Like Tyrese Halliburton has really, really good off the dribble shooting numbers, but Tyrese Halliburton also has quite good shooting numbers when he's open or the contest level is low or things like that. So to me, I still think, you have to be careful about just looking at the a specific stat and then saying like, if on a different team or a different role, that means the spacing wouldn't be there.
And I think Ben, this is the conclusion that I started coming up
You're
with.
pointing to me. You're pointing to me a lot right now. There's a lot of pointing.
I'm pointing to you right now. I'm watching a toddler point a lot, so I'm learning for her to just point when I'm trying to make a point. I don't know really if you can differentiate like the shooting ability of, say, like the top 15 shooters in the league. I don't know if there's a legitimate way that's different in the ways that defenses handle and defend some of these players. So when I really went in and in my head, I'm like, I'm going to have a rock solid top 10 shooters. I actually gave up. I just ended up being like, you know what? I think all of these guys kind of land in the same way. Like, I don't know how I can split apart like what Malik Beasley does and what Zach LaVine does. I don't know how I can split apart what Tyrese Halliburton does and what Buddy Hield does, what Norman Powell does, what Michael Porter Jr. does, what Keon Ellis does. Like, all of these guys are really incredible shooters. Maybe Keon Ellis is somebody that dips down a little bit more.
Wow, but you're in the bullpen there with Keon Ellis that came out of nowhere.
I mean, Sam Hauser, another one, somebody that's shooting like
solid,
47% on wide open threes. Peyton Pritchard, who's
right,
spotting up like
because look who they're playing with. Look who they're playing with.
And this is my point, Ben. I don't actually think you can rank the top 10 shooters. This is the
Wait a second. What is your top 32 shooters? Is that you don't think you can rank the top 32 shooters?
Yes. That's the twist ending I've been waiting to pull out here.
Oh my goodness.
I would start and say this is the top 10 shooters in the league.
What is happening?
And my conclusion is you cannot rank the top 10 shooters in the NBA. That is my take.
I have no idea what's going on right now. Can we do the outro? I guess we could do that. I have no idea what to say. That's it. You don't even. So you have a tier of upper shooters, and they're unrankable.
Yeah, that's my conclusion. I think there's almost too many stats going on right now. There's too many granular numbers you can look at. There's too many contexts to see. There's too many offenses. There's too much dynamic play going on. That like when you watch Steph Curry in like 2016, you're like, oh my goodness, look at the gravity. I tried to watch for that, Ben. I tried to go and watch a bunch of these guys play, and I'm like, I don't know if there's an actual like gravitational difference in the way that these guys are being defended. And if that's not the case, like that's really the thing that matters, right? Is how it bends a defense, how somebody's shooting ability bends a defense. So, if there's not like a clear way to judge that, I don't know if there's a clear way to rank the shooters.
Well, I disagree to some degree because I think you have different levels of coverage that different shooters get. Steph Curry, of course, has his own coverage and it's trickled down to other players, but that doesn't mean you're going to get the 4-on-4. You guys play by yourself while I face guard Steph Curry. That doesn't mean you're going to get the box and one as frequently on Steph Curry. So I do think there's degrees in difference in coverage. And of course, there's degrees in difference in efficacy. Over time, there is a difference between making certain shots at 43% and 40%, which is a reason why I would almost just reject Anthony Edwards into the conversation because we've got like 3 months of him shooting pull-up shots, right? Mm-hmm. Like come back in 3 years. If Anthony Edwards is making 10 pull-up threes a game, then we can talk about him as one of the best shooters ever, even if his efficiency is a little bit lower on those shots just because of the volume. So I do think you have like Curry's the best shooter, and then you probably have a group of shooters below him. I don't know if the tier is 32, but I mean, if you ask me, I could mostly Isaiah Joe, Buddy Hield gets, these guys get interesting because they don't have the off the dribble game, but certainly Darius Garland does, Donovan Mitchell does, Tyrese Halliburton does, Mike Conley has for the last few years, although he's finally aging out. Kobe White is another guy. Jamal Murray certainly does. Heck, Derek White. I mean, Derek White, you start to think about release speed and space and how quick a guy can get into his shot off the dribble or one dribble. You mentioned Duncan Robinson. I mean, Duncan Robinson's off the dribble numbers are phenomenal, not necessarily because he's running pick and roll from the outside, creating space, making a move with the dribble, step back, sidestep three. No, it's because he can play in those actions off the move, catch it, and take a dribble or two and get into a better shot. So to me, there's a lot of guys that I think are going to get that like relatively high top tier coverage away from the ball that you're talking about. And then, of course, if you have more of those on ball skills, you have more diversity, as we talked about a couple of years ago. For me, I would say that's a better shooter. It's a better shooter if you can do it off the dribble, going left, going right, stepping back, and then putting the one leg floater on it, like LeBron did the other night, whenever you need to. Like, so to me, there is, I do think you can say, you know, this handful of players has these skills that this next tier doesn't, which is why I was getting very excited for you to unveil your tier of 32, only to rug pull me at the last minute.
I should say that 32 was basically the guys that I thought would end up there, and I investigated most of them. My like tier is a little bit smaller, and I don't know if you said Donovan Mitchell and all that, but Donovan Mitchell is
I did say Donovan
incredible
Mitchell.
shooter. There's one guy I don't think you did say, and I know this is ground trodden already, but I thought I would just throw out the name. Well, what do you think about somebody like Kevin Durant?
He's tall. He shoots mid-range jumpers.
He does shoot them, but he also, on lower volume, makes an incredibly high percentage of his wide open 3-point shots, right? And then when he gets into mid-range,
once again, it's very low. I just feel like you're heavily over-indexing on like 100 shots from these certain occurrences that take place in the course of an offense versus that. Where I thought you were going was the mid-range, like take long jumpers as an indicator of shooting, not inside 10 feet. Like we know if we're going to talk about touch and inside 10 feet, Nikola Jokic, Zach Randolph, oh my God, off the charts. Zion Williamson off the charts, right? But you start to get out 13, 14, 15 feet and longer, and you want to include those shots in the sample as an indicator of shooting prowess, just like you want to include free throw percentage in the sample as an indicator of shooting prowess. And you'll notice that basically only tall players can take these shots, with the exception occasionally of someone like Donovan Mitchell, who has that very high release point. But you'll see in those numbers, you'll see Durant, you'll see Jason Tatum, you'll see Shea is, you know, we've talked about what he's been able to do, 48% on his long twos this year. And you will see that DeMar DeRozan has taken twice as many of those shots as any other player in the NBA in the last 3 years, shoots them at a good percentage. But to me, there's like this whole thing with that realm of shooting is basically only reserved for tall people because shorter guys have a more difficult task in the first place, creating space over contests.
Looking at, I'm trying to pull it up because I have it here somewhere.
You've been accused of an M. Night Shyamalan twist by the audience in this podcast, and I cannot help feel that way as well. Yes.
Yeah, I was hoping, I was actually going to make that reference, and I couldn't remember his name because I can't remember things. Kevin Durant's shooting like 55% on his long mid-range jumpers because he's just unguardable. And I think the unguardability in terms of that mid-range is also something that I want to factor in here. And I don't know how to factor it. I know his free throw numbers are a little down compared to previous seasons. He's not hitting 90% like he did in the 2010s. But there's basically no one else that's as good, just like, oh, there's a guy on me, I'm just going to rise over you in a Dirk Nowitzki kind of way and hit this 17-footer.
Besides Durant, you mean?
Besides Durant, yes.
See, I think to me that's the Shea, that's the Michael Jordan, that's DeRozan. Who else is in that category? I'm blanking on people.
And I think
it's Chris Middleton did it the last 3 years. Now Chris Middleton's been injured, but the last 3 years. So the last 3 years in this category, very few guys have volume in this category, right? Very few guys have more than 4 attempts per 100 possessions in this category. Long contested twos, that Dirk Nowitzki sweet spot, top of the key, behind the elbow, et cetera, et cetera. We've mentioned most of them. Brandon Ingram is another one. He's made him at 45%. Durant's made him at near 52%. DeAndre Ayton at 50%. Devin Booker at 49%. Joel Embiid at 45%. That, for the most part, Devin Vassell almost hits the cutoff at 46%. And Jamal Murray is the lowest in accuracy at 43%. I mean, there just aren't many players that can do that anymore.
Yeah. And when you combine that with being able to space the floor, That's pretty good. I should end with a Bucks shout out. A Bucks shout out. I don't know if you said AJ Green's name, Ben. I don't know if you said
AJ Green's a good shooter.
He's an incredible shooter.
Do we think he's an incredible shooter?
Why do you not think he's an incredible shooter?
I just don't know if I have enough data on him. The numbers, the sample sizes are extremely small.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you, well, you mentioned eye test earlier. Do you feel like when you watch a shooter without much of a sample, you have a really good feel for how accurate he is, and then over time you're almost always right? Or do you kind of, again, have a fuzzy tier bucket and you go, okay, he's a good shooter, but I don't know if that's like 36 or 43% in the long run?
Can I give you well, first of all, I thought for like the first like however many games I saw Isaiah Joe shoot, like I was convinced he couldn't miss. Like I thought Isaiah Joe just couldn't miss a shot.
I think that's still correct. I don't think Isaiah Joe has ever missed a 3-pointer.
So like that was one where I'm like, I'm pretty sure that Joe is a very good 3-point shooter. But listen, here's my take about AJ Green. I'm somebody that cheers for the Bucks, and when I watch the Bucks play and he has the ball and he shoots, I feel good. And that I don't have good, happy feelings a lot when watching like current Bucks, and he's somebody whose jump shot makes me feel happy.
Cody, they want you to have a list.
Wait, I was supposed to.
The audience is demanding to support the show. Patreon.com/thinkingbasketball. I can't do the outro again. Once again, I've just been completely buckled by the events of what is this an April Fool's joke?
Well, what are you talking? This was brilliant. I love talking about shooting. I needed to get all that shooting off of my chest here, Ben.
What did you want to get off your chest?
I wanted to explore the studio space of shooting, Ben. Like I thought that it was going to be much more cut and dry, right? And I wanted to lead people who went into the darkness of saying, man, I really wish I knew who the best shooters were in the league. I wish there was a podcast that would talk about this sometime.
Who said this? Who was asking for this?
Nobody. The hypothetical fan, Ben, don't you ever like pull up your podcast and be like, I hope so-and-so talks about the best passers. I would really love to hear a discussion of who the best passers are in the NBA right now. I do that every day. That's all I want.
But if we did that with the best passers, we would at the end of the day have a list of the best passers, and then someone would take that list and they would put it on Reddit, and then people would tell us we're stupid and they'd argue about it and all that stuff. But it would be there. It'd be a tangible list. And even if we said, I'm not sure how I feel about 1 or 4 or whatever, you would still know it's Nikola Jokic, it's Trae Young, it's Luka Doncic, it's LeBron James. You would still know, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's what I found so interesting.
Here you're saying we have to have the best shooters. We have to have the best shooters in the league right now just to declare that we can't say who the best shooters in the league are.
That's exactly. We can say who the best shooters are, but unlike some of these other skills like passing and the best players, which we'll get to and stuff, I don't think we can do it. I just don't think you can do it. It seems to be the skill that is most difficult to rank. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
I disagree. I mean, this isn't even my thing. I disagree. I think Mitchell, White, both White. You got Kobe White, you got Derek White, Isaiah Joe, Buddy Hield, definitely Jamal Murray,
Luke Kennard.
Well, Luke Kennard is in the Seth Curry thing, where like if you get very like your ability to get the shot off. So we've talked about this before. Volume is a reflection of opportunity and skill and possibility. And so when your volume goes down, you're self-selecting shots away from yourself. It's like, great, you made 2 wide open threes every whatever possessions at 50%. And that's all you ever take. All you ever take is wide open threes. You don't take anything else. Your teammates need to put it on a silver platter for you. And it gets even better when you have someone who like only wants to shoot from the corner or something like that. So volume in the abstract and volume in each subsection of shooting is an indicator of accessing more shots that you can take. And so I think guys that can only do it in one way, you have to kind of wonder if there is Luke Kennard a better shooter than Jamal Murray? I think in a 3-point shooting contest, but probably not holistically.
I actually think Luke Kennard is quite an adept little step back shooter. He's got this nice little chases him off. He can go up, step back a little bit to the left. He's very good at escaping a little bit and getting the shot there. I saw that was a skill that stood out to me. I don't know who else was said here. Jalen Brunson's a very good shooter. Kyrie Irving is a very good shooter. Klay Thompson. I don't know if you said Klay Thompson.
Yeah, Klay Thompson. Yeah.
Do you not think Brunson and Kyrie are up there?
They're good. They're good. They would be in the next tier for me, probably. Yeah. Tyler Hero, Anthony Simons, Tyrese Maxey, guys like that. Yeah,
So it
Malik.
sounds like you just listed a bunch of players that would be very difficult to rank, Ben.
Well, no, I wouldn't. I don't know how you would rank them, but I think there are tiers, there are levels to this.
Okay, so this person said, "Can't have my birthday ruined by this basketball philosophy type of valued base." My guy, why are you showing up to this podcast if you don't want some basketball philosophy?
You've
Also,
rug pulled us. You've rug pulled us, and you're not taking responsibility for
the
it.
Michael
So
Kidd Gilchrist
you
call
completely rug pulled us.
that's just mean. That's a mean call.
By him or me.
No, the Michael Kidd Gilchrist shout out. That's a mean comment to have in the posts there.
I don't know. All right, we gotta get out of here. Thanks for listening to this one, and hope you're having a great day.